The Lantern in the Attic. A gentle adventure of family, memory, and wonder. Chapter 1, The House with Blue Shutters. Nora Bellamy had always loved rainy afternoons. The kind when the sky turned to pearl and clouds wrapped the world in soft gray wool. On such days, the little blue-shuttered house where she lived with her grandfather seemed to settle deeper into its foundations, as if even the house itself was sighing with contentment. The Bellamy house sat at the edge of the village of Bramble Bay, a place stitched together with cobbled lanes, salt-swept porches, and gossip shared over warm loaves of bread. Children played under ancient trees, boats bobbed lazily in the harbor, and gulls cried high over the cliffs. It was a town where stories lived long lives, whispered from generation to generation. The Bellamy house had belonged to Nora's family for over 100 years. Its attic beams were carved with initials of ancestors long past, its floorboards creaked familiarly, and the garden always bloomed, wild and unruly, just as her great-grandmother had liked it. Nora, 12 years old with a mind full of questions and a heart as curious as a fox's nose, lived with her grandfather, Pops. Her parents were away often, working as marine biologists who chased whales and charted coral reefs in far-off seas. But Pops, with his silver hair, knowing smile, and deep laugh, filled the house with a warmth no storm could chase away. Each night, he'd settle into his armchair with a mug of tea while Nora curled up beside him. He'd tell her stories, some true, some not, and many that danced between both. But the story Nora loved most, the one that made her eyes widen and her thoughts drift off like kites, was about the Bellamy treasure. A chest hidden by your great-great-grandfather during the War of the North Wind, Pops would begin, eyes glinting. Full of heirlooms, trinkets, letters, maybe even gold. He buried it deep, so deep that none of us ever found it. But it's out there, little star. Waiting. Nora had always thought it was just a story, until the attic rained secrets. Chapter 2, The Envelope Behind the Wall. The rain drummed gently on the roof, a lullaby of soft percussion. It was the sort of day made for exploring dusty corners. Nora had asked Pops if she could dig around in the attic, and he'd said yes with a knowing look. Careful of the squirrels, he'd joked. She climbed the creaky steps, flashlight in hand. The attic smelled of cedar, old paper, and lavender sachets long past their bloom. Sunlight filtered through a small round window, catching dust motes that danced like fairy lights. She found trunks stuffed with yellowed newspapers, boxes of faded photographs, and an old spinning wheel with a cobweb like lace stretched across it. But then, behind a leaning shelf of gardening books, she noticed a loose wooden panel in the wall. She tugged. The panel shifted with a groan, revealing a narrow gap between the wall studs. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a sealed envelope tied with a green velvet ribbon. Nora sat cross-legged and carefully opened it. Inside was a folded map. Not a modern map, but one drawn by hand on thick parchment. Inked in fine, looping letters, it showed the layout of Bramble Bay, not as it was today, but as it might have been 100 years ago. The coastline, the woods, the hills, all familiar, yet different. And there, in red, were a series of small X's, leading inland, away from the village. At the bottom, in a spidery hand, were the words. To the Bellamy who dares to follow, begin where the meadow sways, trust the trees. Listen for the silence, the heart will know the path. Nora's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. Wonder. Discovery. Destiny. She dashed down the attic stairs, calling, Pops. Chapter 3, The Meadow That Sang. The next morning, the rain had passed, leaving the air bright and clean. Nora and Pops packed a small satchel, flashlight, compass, jam sandwiches, a thermos of tea, and the old leather-bound notebook that had belonged to Nora's great-grandmother, Eleanor Bellamy. They set out across Bramble Bay, heading toward the hills beyond the village where the old meadows still grew wild. The townsfolk rarely ventured there now, most of the land was overgrown or used by the wildlife. But when they reached the top of the first hill, they saw it, a wide, breezy meadow of tall, golden grass. And as the wind swept through it, the stalks rustled and shimmered, making a sound like gentle song. The meadow that sings, Pops whispered. Nora unfolded the map. The first X was just on the other side of the meadow. They walked carefully, watching for signs. And then Nora saw it. A ring of standing stones, worn and crumbling, half swallowed by grass. In the center was a stone marker, shaped like a bell. She approached and touched the top. A click. Then a tiny compartment opened. Inside was a brass key and a note. To find what was hidden, you must now follow what was forgotten. Seek the tree that sleeps with stars. Beneath its roots, the second key lies. Chapter 4, The Silver Woods. They continued into the forest beyond the meadow. The woods here were pale-barked and luminous in the sun. The trees were not planted but seemed placed, like guardians. As evening fell, they made camp beside a brook. Pops told Nora how Eleanor used to walk these same woods and how she'd once claimed she could hear the trees whisper at night. That night, Nora dreamed of a great tree, leaves silver in moonlight, roots deep as time. They found it the next morning, just as the dawn light turned the woods to gold. The great tree stood alone on a small hill, its branches like arms stretched toward the sky. At its base was an iron plate. Nora and Pops worked together to lift it. Beneath, nestled in a wooden box wrapped in oilcloth, was another key, and a faded photograph of Eleanor, holding a lantern. On the back, keep the light. Follow the tide. Chapter 5, Where the Tide Forgets. The final clue pointed them toward the sea, the tide pools beyond the cliffs. At low tide, the rock shelves stretched far out, revealing caverns carved by centuries. They waited until the tide retreated. Following the lantern symbol on the map, they made their way across slippery stone and shallow pools until they reached a narrow crevice between boulders. Inside, lit only by flashlight, was a staircase descending into the dark. It led to a dry cavern, lit faintly from cracks above. At its center, a stone pedestal with 3 keyholes. Nora placed the keys. A click. The floor rumbled. A hidden panel opened to reveal a wooden chest wrapped in sailcloth. Inside were journals, letters, a compass, silver trinkets, and a locket with a tiny painted portrait of a girl who looked like Nora. A note in elegant handwriting. To the Bellamy who finds this, you are not only heir to these things, but to the story, the memory, the wonder. Tell it well. Add to it. Pass it on. Chapter 6, The Return. Back at the blue-shuttered house, Nora and Pop sat on the porch, the sea air carrying the scent of jasmine and salt. Nora had placed the lantern from the chest on the porch table. She lit it that evening. Its glow was soft and golden. The story of the Bellamy treasure was no longer just a story. It was memory, mystery, and family. And Nora knew, as she watched the stars blink awake in the sky, that she would one day leave a trail of excess for someone else to follow. But for now, wrapped in a blanket beside Pops, a cup of tea in her hand, she simply whispered, "Thank you," and slept. Epilogue, The Map Drawer. Years later, the little house with the blue shutters still stood, though ivy had climbed higher and the bellflowers were even more unruly. Nora, now grown, lived there still, with a child of her own. One rainy afternoon, much like the one long ago, her daughter climbed into the attic. There she found an old map drawer, one with a lock Nora had long forgotten. Inside were scrolls, lanterns, pressed leaves, a worn compass, and dozens of hand-drawn maps, each leading to a piece of family memory, some old, some new. And in the very bottom drawer, a small velvet box with a green ribbon. A note inside read, "To the Bellamy who dares to wonder, begin where the rain falls soft, trust the wind. Follow the glow and listen to the silence between the stories." And so, another journey began. The end.